Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast, brought to you by Small House Farm. Join us as we talk with gardeners, foragers, herbalists, chefs, and community activists to explore the many ways that plants impact our cultures and cuisines, our history, and our future. I'm your host, Bevan Cohen, and this is Seeds and Weeds. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Seeds and Weeds. Today, we're going to be hanging out with Megan Edge. Now, Megan is an author, herbalist, and forager from British Columbia, and we're going to be digging into the topic of foraging. We're going to talk about ethical harvesting, Megan's thoughts on foraging invasive species. We're going to explore gathering and using wild lettuce, and she's going to share some of her favorite forageables and other fun stories. This episode is just packed with info, so you're going to want to stick around. You know, ever since we recorded this interview, I've been thinking about some of my favorite plants to forage, and that's a hard list to put together. When this episode airs, Heather and I are going to be down in Ventura, California for the Heirloom Expo. And Southern California is like the land of plenty for foraging. There's prickly pears, rosemary, nasturtiums, fruit trees, so many wonderful things. And that's just what you can easily find during a walk through like a residential neighborhood. But back home in Michigan, there's also many, many wonderful plants to gather, whether it's for food or for medicine. Actually, in this interview with Megan, we talk about how food and medicine are really one and the same. But if I had to pick a favorite forageable, I would maybe say berries, just for like the instant gratification, right? You pick them, you eat them, yum. There's blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, Juneberries, and so many tasty little treats out there. Actually, just last week, we were kayaking down the Chippewa River, which is maybe a mile or so down the road from Small House, and along the riverbank, I spotted a small apple tree, and it was just loaded with apples, right? So I paddled on over, and I picked what I could from the kayak, and I gotta tell you, it was the perfect snack to enjoy while we floated on down that river. If I had to pick something a bit more practical to forage, I guess I would say that my favorite thing to gather would be stinging nettles. They're nutritious. I mean, nettles are an incredible wild food, and they're medicinal. We use nettles in a wide range of different applications, from herbal teas to topical salves, and even as a tincture. In fact, we're including a bottle of nettles tincture in our autumn seasonal gift basket that we're sending out to members of our Patreon community. Each season, we create and curate a special collection of herbal products that really captures the essence of the season, and then we send them out to our Patreon community to enjoy. Now, the herbal gift boxes, they only get shipped out to patrons that are at certain membership levels, but everyone in our Patreon community gets to enjoy a variety of membership benefits. Things like the seasonal herb boxes or special episodes of the podcast, access to our urban tea co-op, all sorts of cool stuff. You can check it out at patreon.com/smallhousefarm, or just find the link down in the show notes. Megan Edge comes from a long line of foragers, and having foraged across Canada in both wild and urban settings, she has a wealth of experience to share. A generational forager, Megan has ethically harvested from the forest since she was a child, and now, through her shop, Beyond the Garden Gate, she shares Mother Nature's healing bounty with her teas, salves, and tinctures. Today, Megan is joining us on the show to talk about foraging, both food and medicine. Megan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Bevan. I really appreciate it.
I'm really excited to talk about foraging with you, but before we jump into all that, would you mind just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and the work that you do?
Sure. Well, I hail from Victoria, British Columbia, which is on the west coast of Canada. This is where I was born and bred, although I've lived all over the country. And my foraging, I come to naturally. I grew up in a foraging family. I consider myself a generational forager. And more than that, what I love to do is to help educate people about foraging, about nature, about the wilderness, about what's even in their backyard or in their neighborhoods, all with a focus and an aim on helping people achieve the best state of well-being and health that they can have through as many natural processes and natural avenues as possible. So fundamentally, I'm a healer, and I do have a private healing practice where I work with people one-on-one to help them through trauma or grief or finding their life path, whatever it is that they happen to need. And I incorporate into that healing natural products that I make from the foods and plants and mushrooms that I forage. So it all ties in together into a beautiful way to help people be well in this world.
So I saw that you're in Victoria, which is, what is that, like right across the border from Seattle, isn't it?
Exactly as the crow flies. In fact, we can see Portland from the beach over here.
Oh, that's awesome. So what wild plants are you currently foraging for? Right as we're recording this, it's near the end of August. So how's the weather there and what's popping?
Well, interestingly, we've had what I've referred to as Augustuary for the last 3 weeks. We've had very cool, very wet weather, which is not abnormal when we're in an El Nino. We do tend to get these wetter, cooler summers, but what that means is that we may be able to find an early flush of chanterelle mushrooms. So in fact, my daughters and I are going out tomorrow morning to one of our favorite mushroom spots to see if we in fact have one of those early flushes of mushrooms. Additionally to that, I just harvested a bunch of elderberry from my backyard and from my neighbor's backyard. And of course, there's all sorts of wonderful flowers and herbs that are available right now that we can forage either wild or urban foraging, which is, of course, when you're foraging in your neighbor's backyard.
That's one of my favorite things to do.
Absolutely. Oh, blackberries. We've got blackberries up now, salal berries. I don't know if you have salal where you are, but salal is a native plant to the West Coast, and it's just a powerhouse of antioxidants.
I don't know that one. I'm not familiar with that. What does it look and taste like?
Well, you might, if you buy flower bouquets, you might be familiar with the leaves of the salal because they are used in the floral industry because it's an evergreen. It's quite a thick, waxy leaf. They're a low-growing shrub. They thrive along the coast, and the berries are dark, dark, dark blue, almost black. Lots of little tiny seeds in them, and they tend to be on the drier side, like the flesh is dry. And unlike a blackberry that has lots of little fruit around each individual seed, this is more like a blueberry. And it has a flavor that's between, I would say, a blueberry, a blackberry, and then it has a very unique, almost like a musky flavor, but in a really, palatable way, as opposed to like a different kind of musky. Very, very medicinal, really good for us. Lots of antioxidants, great for boosting the immune system. And I love to use it in jam, or I make a salal berry wine, and that's a great one for throughout the winter for keeping your immune system strong.
Oh, that's interesting. The musky flavor, the way that you described the fruit, made me think of like black currants.
Not dissimilar from black currants. Yeah, if you were to put together a blackberry, a blueberry, and a black currant, you'd be fairly close to the flavor. There's also a bit of a salty flavor, and that might be because it is a coastal plant, and so it's picking up salt from the air because it's down on the beach or along the rivers. It could also be the soil that it grows in. We have very thin soil here on the West Coast, so lots of minerals are available through the roots of a lot of our local plants.
It's interesting. There's really just been such a surge of interest in foraging, particularly in recent years. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a number of factors that are happening. People are questioning the mainstream medical model in North America. And I feel like more and more people are wondering if there's another way to be healthy and well besides a pharmaceutical pill, a chemical-based sterile pill, which some of these medications do have their time and place. I don't want to be bashing mainstream medicine, and they are often used for a particular symptom or set of symptoms. But what people are moving more towards now is an understanding of prevention as opposed to emergency critical. Now it's so bad we have to respond. More people are interested in maintaining a healthy lifestyle, I think, and learning the different ways in which they can support things like their immune system or their central nervous system through the foods that they eat. And it's what Hippocrates said is, let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. We're learning how detrimental our North American diet is for people. We're seeing a huge uptick in a lot of neurological diseases, and mainstream medicine, it doesn't have a preventative approach to these sorts of health issues. And really, I would describe it as a crisis. I think North Americans are very much in a health crisis. So as people wake up to that, they're looking for ways that they can support their whole system. And of course, holistic, natural, organic, all of that, that's what people want to learn about now, I think.
I was checking out your website, and it looks like you got a really nice line of herbal products that you offer there. And did I see also that you lead foraging workshops for folks?
I do. Yeah, I love getting people out into the forest or along the beach and sharing what I know and what I've learned over my lifetime to help people feel really comfortable and confident when they're out foraging.
What are some of your favorite plants to forage? Well, I know that's a hard one. So let's say maybe like one medicinal plant and then maybe something for the kitchen.
Well, but here's the thing about food being medicine. A medicinal plant is also a culinary plant. And that's why I've put together these two ebooks. One is called 10 easy to grow culinary herbs for your garden, and the other, or culinary medicinal herbs for your garden, and the other is 10 easy to grow flowers, medicinal and culinary. Because everything that we put into our bodies is medicine. I can tell you what my favorite thing to forage is. I grew up foraging for mushrooms since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I think my parents put me down in the forest floor because I was the closest to the floor at that height. So my whole life has been waiting for the seasons for each of the things that we could, or the many things that we could forage in any given season. But by far, mushrooms, my absolute favorite. And I grew up harvesting or foraging chanterelle mushrooms primarily, but we also would go out for boletes. I've now expanded my repertoire, and there are just so many amazing mushrooms that I love to forage, both for their medicine as well as for their culinary uses. And like I say, when we bring the two together, it's a great situation because you're getting your medicine in that beautiful, stew that you just made.
You just said a lot of stuff that I want to dig into. So the first thing was when you talked about your parents putting you on the forest floor. I did the same thing with my children when they were little. They're at the perfect angle at that height to be able to spot. Morel mushrooms is what we hunt for a lot in the spring here in Michigan. And just being short, they were perfect. They could spot them every time.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's really funny. And I love what you said about the overlap of culinary and medicinal plants. And that's so true. I got a book coming out next year from Timber Press that we worked on, a book about herbs. And they really wanted me to lean into writing a medicinal herb book. And I've kind of already done that. And I thought, I really want to include a bunch of culinary recipes utilizing these herbs in the kitchen. And, my rationale when I had to talk to my editor about it was like, look, there's really no difference between food and medicine, right? And we have to approach them together to truly understand them holistically, all of the things that these plants can offer us.
Absolutely. And when you consider our evolution, Bevan, we've evolved within these environments. So our bodies and our brains are primed to benefit from the constituents that are in all of these foods, like your kitchen herbs, your sage, rosemary, thyme, parsley, oregano. These are powerhouses of medicine that our ancestors and our grandmothers and our mothers probably knew how to incorporate into our foods. And they understood the benefit of the medicine and the flavoring that these herbs would bring for us. So you're right. You really can't tease out the culinary from the medicinal because they are one and the same thing.
Absolutely. Now let's go back to those ebooks that you mentioned. You were so kind and very generously offered to share these two ebooks with our listeners for free. And folks listening, I'm putting that link in the show notes. So you just follow that link, use the password that's down there, and you're going to be able to download not just one, but two ebooks that Megan has written. So Megan, could you just tell the folks a little bit about the books that you're sharing with them?
Yes, absolutely. So I chose 10 herbs, common herbs that people would be familiar with, and 10 flowers that people would be familiar with. And each flower and each herb, there's a photograph, nice colorful photograph, so you can really easily identify what they are. And then a little bit of the history of the way in which that herb or that flower has been used medicinally and culinarily, and then different ways that you can use it as medicine. So things like how to make a tincture or a salve or an infused oil, and whether you're taking it internally or you're using it topically on your skin, and then how to grow it. So what the zones are and what the soil and sun shade requirements are. So it's a really great primer for getting people excited about what they can grow easily that they can also then benefit from culinarily and medicinally.
That's so cool. That's so kind of you to share that with everybody. I think folks are going to love it.
Oh, good. Well, you're very welcome.
Now, when your publicist reached out to me, she mentioned that one of the plants that you often work with is wild lettuce. So could you dig a little bit into that for us? What time of year is best for foraging wild lettuce, and where can you most often find it growing?
So wild lettuce grows in the same way that dandelions grow. It grows pretty much everywhere. It's what's called a wayside herb or a wayside plant, meaning that it grows along the side of the road. It grows in your garden. Most people would probably weed it out of their garden because they would think it's a dandelion. Now, you should never weed out dandelions either because they are a powerhouse of nutrition and medicine.
You got that right.
I now plant dandelions. I take my dandelion seeds and I sprinkle them all over my garden.
Awesome.
Much to my neighbor's disdain. But similarly with wild lettuce, so it grows like domesticated lettuce does. And if you're familiar with, and I think everybody is, domesticated lettuce, you'll notice that there's a white sap that comes from the vein and the spine of a lettuce leaf. Well, that's where the medicine is. It's in that sap. And what people are getting excited about wild lettuce for is the potency of that sap as a pain management or painkiller. It's similar, it affects the central nervous system and it affects the pain centers of our brain. It helps us to be calm and it helps with the body's inflammation. And it's interesting because one of the reasons why we generally eat salads after a meal is to help with digestion, because lettuce helps with digestion. But lettuce also has a soporific effect. So what that means is that it helps us feel sleepy and relaxed and content. And one of the ways to manage pain is to bring that sort of flight or fight response down a notch or two so that our body can manage the pain better instead of us getting into a tight ball of pain. So that's what people are using the wild lettuce for. Springtime is your best time before the plant has put up its flowers, because once the plant has put up its flowers, and the flowers look like lettuce flowers or a little bit like dandelion flowers, all the energy goes into the flower, of course, and then the seed production. And so that white milky sap, it tends to dry up later on in the season. So spring is the best time to do it. And then people use it in varying ways. You can infuse oil with the wild lettuce leaves and heat that on a double boiler just very gently, and the heat will pull the healing attributes out of the lettuce. And then you can use that infused oil to make a salve and apply it topically. Or you can make a tincture out of the leaves as well. And then you can take that in a glass of water or underneath your tongue when you find yourself in some pain.
That is fascinating. So wild lettuce, it's a different species than the domesticated lettuce, but it is in the same genus. And domesticated lettuce does have that same kind of, that white latex sap. Do you think that possibly domesticated lettuce would also be beneficial for similar uses?
I think absolutely. I would encourage people to grow their own and to grow it as organically as possible. But certainly, and I've done a bunch of studies on this, the difference between wild lettuce and domestic lettuce. And the research is showing that the effects are very similar.
In the world of foraging, there's a lot of conversation about ethical harvesting, which is obviously very important, especially with this increased interest in foraging. There's a lot more folks out there doing it. What advice do you have for folks that might just be getting into foraging, they might be new to it, just to make sure that they're making safe and responsible foraging choices?
Yeah, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. When I was growing up, we were always taught you only take as much as you need versus as much as you want. There's a thing about foraging is it's so exciting when you see that first mushroom or you see that first blackberry and you just want to pick all of them. And I get that. But if you do that, you run the risk of really disrupting the natural environment that these plants and funguses are growing in. And especially in the case of mushrooms, there's a very complex community of mycelium underneath the surface of the forest floor that these mushrooms are a part of. The mushroom is the fruiting body of this mycelium colony. And if you take all of those mushrooms at the same time, you're depleting the mycelium colony of being able to, bring those mushrooms back up again the following fall. You're also trampling on a very delicate ecosystem when you go tromping through the forest. So what I tell people that when I take them out foraging is you take what you need and you always make sure that you don't clear cut anything. So if you've got a patch of mushrooms, you don't take every mushroom. You leave some mushrooms behind. You let them finish their cycle. Same with berries, same with fruits, leaves, whatever it is, there's enough to go around, right? And I really encourage people to not get into the mindset of, I have to get everything, because you're not only ruining it for yourself, but you're also ruining it for future generations or the environment itself. And the other reason to only take as much as you need is because you're going to have to go home and you're going to have to process all these wonderful things that you have foraged. And they don't have a very long shelf life necessarily, right? So you've got to be able to keep that in mind as well. How much time do you have to make sure that you are able to process everything that you have picked that day? I will often come home from a 4 or 5 hour mushrooming foraging trip, and I've got 6 hours ahead of me of cleaning and cutting and cooking or drying. So these are important things to consider. And the other thing that I grew up with, especially around the mushrooms, is, and I'll say this about mushroom hunters love to share their mushrooms with you, but they are not necessarily going to share the location of where they got those mushrooms. And it's not that they're being selfish. It's because if they're a really, like a true forager, they understand how quickly word of mouth spreads and how easily an area can be overpicked.
Oh, yeah. And we experienced that same thing here, especially with the morel mushrooms that I was talking about earlier. Folks are happy to share them. You can come over and enjoy them, but they will never tell you where they get them from. It's top secret.
The other thing that I say to people, if they're just getting started with foraging, is pick one thing. Like, let's say it's blackberries. So just pick blackberries this year. Get a real good sense of how much you enjoy or don't enjoy doing it, what's involved, what you need, how to process them. And then the next year, add something else, right? Instead of going out and just, again, like sort of clear cutting, picking absolutely everything. Learn one plant really well, really create a relationship with that plant and understand its benefits and all the reasons why you would want to work with it instead of overwhelming yourself with 1,000 different choices.
You are speaking my language for sure, Megan. So my next question here is sort of in this similar vein, but maybe a little bit more spicy. It's something people get maybe more emotional about sometimes. What are your thoughts on foraging and working with invasive species?
Oh, that's another great topic. And that's one that we really work with out here because when the first settlers arrived, European settlers arrived, one of the plants that they brought with them was called Scotch broom. And in its native habitat in Scotland, it's perfectly suited for that environment. And of course, there's checks and balances to its spread. But when it got here, and because there was such a manic clear cutting of forests on the West Coast 120 years ago, 150 years ago, it was perfect for Scotch broom to come in as an intermediary plant and just absolutely take over open spaces. And one of the problems with that is that the roots themselves exude a phytotoxic chemical into the soil, which inhibits the growth of native plants around it. So it basically takes over the native environment. At what point is an invasive species no longer invasive? How long does it have to be in that environment before it's integrated itself into the whole ecosystem? And I don't have the answer to that question, but it's a question I often wonder about. The same with the blackberries we have here. We have a blackberry called a Himalayan blackberry. It's an introduced species. It sends canes out and gallops across open spaces, but the fruit is heavy and sweet and ponderous. Like there's just tens of thousands of berries on these shrubs. So as a forager, that's a really productive plant, but it's also very invasive and it inhibits, again, the growth of native plants. I guess I look at it from the perspective of, is there a culinary or medicinal value to the plant that I can utilize so that there is meaning in the plant's existence in the ecosystem? But it is also now part of the landscape. And if you think about the way that plants have spread all around the globe, everything at some point or another has been invasive in an environment that it didn't necessarily evolve in originally. And also the thing to keep in mind, Bevan, is that everything changes. I come across this when I talk with people who are very passionate about conservancy. So, for example, we have a bog here in Victoria called Rithit's Bog, and there's a huge push to keep it as it is. Not let it change, not let it evolve, because we are familiar with it in this state and we don't want it to become not a bog. But a bog is a transitory environment and it can last for tens of thousands of years or it can last for a decade. But eventually other plants are going to come in and are going to create either an open field or a forest or whatever the next step is of that. So at what point are we doing nature a disservice by disallowing her to grow and evolve in the way that she's supposed to? And I think we have to call into question our own inability to accept that change is inevitable and is a natural part of evolution.
What are the links that folks are going to need so they can connect with you, check out your herbal products, look at your classes, and learn more about foraging?
Well, they're welcome to go to my Beyond the Garden Gate Botanicals website, which is beyondthegardengate.ca. And there's lots of information there, lots of blogs, great images. All the photographs or almost all the photographs are my pictures taken out on my varying foraging escapades. They can also find out more about my healing work at meganedge.ca. They can find me on LinkedIn under Megan Edge. They can find me on Facebook, Instagram. So I try to limit the number of places people can find me. To be honest, it gets overwhelming otherwise.
I hear you there. I'm going to put all those links down in the show notes too, and they're going to be right with the link so folks can download their ebooks as well so they can get started reading those. Megan, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. This was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed myself.
Well. It looks like we're at the end of yet another show. Thanks again to Megan Edge for being our guest today and to all of you for tuning in. Remember, if you enjoy the podcast and would like to support our work, you certainly can by joining our Patreon community. Find that link and so much more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm, and right now, we're enjoying this break beat from Mo Mott Music. Thanks again for joining us, friends. I'm Bevan Cohen, and we'll see you next time.